Hello, and welcome to the Sugar Bell Review, a program dedicated to learning about the people, places, and policies that make up the Bellbrook Sugar Creek community. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight we have with us a special guest, Dr. Vanessa Enoch from the 8th Congressional District. So she's our next door neighbor's Congressional District. So we appreciate you joining us for the evening. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Diana.
We appreciate you taking the time, and I'm actually very interested to learn because I got to have Desiree Timms on earlier to talk about our district, and given that you're technically our neighboring district, be interesting to see how you guys you'd be looking at changing the district if you won the seat. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Before we get into the politics angle of it, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you, doctor of?
My PhD is in public policy and social change. Okay. I also have a master's in business administration with a concentration in IT.
Wow.
And then I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice.
Okay, you've been busy.
Yeah, slightly. Yes, absolutely. Good way to put it.
No, is it busier getting all of the education, or are you busier now running for a?
You know what? It's probably running a close second, but I'll tell you what, when I was working on my PhD, mm-hmm. I was doing that as a single mom because my husband passed away in 2009, and I was raising my 2 daughters, and I was also running my business. Mm-hmm. I was teaching at 5 different colleges, and I was doing my PhD full time. So if you can imagine.
No.
And so my schedule right now kind of parallels that. It's very similar where I don't get very much sleep, and I'm always constantly in meetings or running and doing something. So yeah, it is a lot of work.
Sounds like it's probably pretty hard on the family structure.
Well, you know what? The good thing is that both of my daughters are grown now.
Okay.
My oldest daughter is 26, and she works for Google, but she's working from home. So she came back to Ohio, and she's going to be working from home until Google decides that they're going to go back to the office. And so far, that's not going to happen until probably July or sometime next year. And then my youngest daughter's in college, and she's in school down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So it opens my schedule wide open. I still have my business, but it gives me a lot of time at this point now that my kids are raised.
To focus on the campaign. That
Absolutely.
Sounds like a good time to start trying to branch out into something that must take. I can only imagine, considering that what you described was impressive, to say the least. So if you're comparing the two,
yeah, it's still a huge sacrifice, but it makes for a better time and opportunity now that they're adults.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you always been a resident of the sort of general Dayton area?
I have always been a resident of, well, not always. I grew up in actually a small town in Ohio, Portsmouth, Ohio.
Okay.
And then moved to Cincinnati when I was in junior high school. And so I went to school there, and I was actually between Cincinnati and then Columbus because my grandmother, who raised me when I was younger, because my mom worked 2nd and 3rd shift jobs, she was a telephone operator. And so since she was working crazy hours, my sister and I lived with my grandmother, but it was a lot of us who lived with my grandmother. I always say it was 16. It was actually 11 of us who lived with my grandmother. But then I have 16 cousins, and so I'm programmed to think all of us live together because at some point in time, most of us did live with my grandmother because our parents were working crazy hours, and they were able to have the support of my grandma.
Yeah.
And
it's lovely that she could do that.
Absolutely.
Must have been fun having that many people around your age, too.
It was fun. We had a whole baseball team, a whole basketball team.
You were never shy of players.
We had everybody we needed right there in our house, but it was fun.
So you've sort of been around the area, and then now where did you settle?
I settled in Westchester, Ohio, which is where I live now. I've been there for about 16, 17 years or so, and that's where I raised my daughters. And after when my husband and I first moved to Westchester, and we were raising our kids there. And then after he passed away, my kids grew up still in Westchester, went to Lakota schools in Westchester.
Nice.
So yeah, that's where they, that's really home.
Cool. And so after being busy and finally getting to a point where life was quieting down as your children have moved into adulthood, then you decided to get into politics. What gave you that drive to jump back into the fray, so to speak?
I didn't really decide to get into politics. I think I was drafted into politics. I really do. Really, what happened is I've always been very involved in the political sphere, but not as a candidate. I worked on campaigns.
Okay.
This is my 27th campaign,
My
my own. So I got into the campaign life really to help get people elected.
Okay.
And who I
Wanted to
supported.
support.
Yeah. And so what happened is I saw this article, and it said, room full of old white males, and it was on Twitter.
Okay.
Room full of old white males decide the fate of women's health care. Well, what concerned me about that picture wasn't, well, let me tell you about the picture. There were no young people in the room, there were no women in the room, and there were no people of color in the room. And out of that room, they decided that insurance would not have to cover women's maternity care.
Okay.
But they said it's really important that insurance covers Viagra. So that taught me a lesson in representation.
Why it's important to have somebody
who can represent
yeah.
everybody, and women represent everybody. When women are in office, it is statistically proven, and I know these statistics because I study statistics as a PhD.
Okay.
But when women are in office, women tend to take care of everybody. And so after looking at just that picture, it really compelled me to go look for somebody to run for office, to help run for this seat.
Sort of fill some of that need for more representation.
Right. And so when I went to look and see if there was anybody who I could help run for office, nobody had thrown their hat in the ring. And I go and I pick up petitions, blank petitions, because I'm going to take them and help somebody get them filled out.
Yep.
Well, when I walked in the Democratic Party meeting that night, they said, "You're the one we're looking for." And I'm like, "No, I'm not." But
Wait, what?
I'm just here to help. And so they said, "Well, tell us why, you think it's so important to have somebody compete for this position." And I talked about the frustrations of what I was seeing in Washington, D.C., and I felt like they weren't representing the interest of the people. That our district is about $10,000 lower. The per capita income is about $10,000 lower than the national household income.
Okay.
And the person who currently holds the seat is a millionaire. He's from a wealthy family. His father was a business owner, and he's never had a job aside from working for daddy's business. And, really just doesn't understand the struggles of working people.
So it goes back to that issue of representation. It's not even representation in terms of gender or color. It's representation in terms of, do you understand the experience that I have lived through?
Exactly. And my neighbors. And I mean, I'm not in the poorest area of the district, but, if you can imagine, the district, the rural communities have been ignored in our district. The lower income communities have been ignored in our district, and it's most of the district. And so the district doesn't have representation, and that it bothers me because we can be so much more. We could have mass transit across the rural areas. And right now, the pandemic has demonstrated the need to ensure that we have technology, we have access to the internet all across the district. You drive to many of the communities and many of the rural areas across this district, there's not even internet access or cell phone service.
Remind me of the counties that your district entails, because this is part of the conversation.
Absolutely. So it's Butler County,
Okay.
Clark, Dark, Miami, Mercer, and Preble counties.
All right, and when we looked at the map earlier, it kind of almost looks like an R over the top of the Montgomery County.
Exactly,
correct?
exactly. And that's a good description because they've gerrymandered it so that they could choose their voters instead of voters choosing who they want to represent them.
So the district tends to run more Republican?
Yes, it does, absolutely. And for the past 81 years, the district has been run by Republican rule, one party rule. And if you can imagine, that means that the needs of the people get ignored because the Republican Party tends to support big business.
Economy.
And, they're not really concerned. Well, when you say the economy, it's not the economy from the standpoint of
you and me,
giving,
but from large
me
business.
and you. It's more, how can we structure the economy to make it better for business? And, that would be fine if it equated to better pay for people, ensuring that people have jobs, and making sure that our infrastructure is taken care of, and those things that we care about as people.
On a day-to-day level.
Right. Are we eating healthy foods?
Do we have access to it?
Do we have access to it? Those kinds, is our small business community taken care of? Those are not the things that our Republican Party in this country thinks about.
Or at least hasn't been demonstrated
Exactly.
in their policy. Yeah.
Right, right.
So speaking of policy, what are the parts of your campaign that you were the most enthusiastic about seeing? Most everybody I've talked to has been like, if I could do one thing, if I can get elected and fix one thing, sometimes it's more than one, but generally, what are the things for you that fall into that category?
So it would be, for me, it would be number one, healthcare. We're in trouble as far as healthcare is concerned. We were in trouble before it was a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And right now we run the risk of losing our healthcare. People with pre-existing conditions, you can hang it up, it's going away. They're in court right now trying to do away with pre-existing conditions, but the people who are in office talk out of both sides of their mouths. And so they're like, oh, we're going to protect people with pre-existing conditions. Well, you're in court right now fighting to make sure that pre-existing conditions are not covered. We're gonna take care of kids who are on their parents' insurance who are 26 years and under. Well, you're fighting to make sure you don't have to cover our kids until 26. And so healthcare, that's number one.
Okay.
Number two, the pandemic has left our economy in shambles.
Yes.
There are so many people who have not returned to work, and I was dismayed. The Fed came out and made this announcement yesterday to talk about, how bad the economy is and how many people are literally still out of work. But what they do is, once you are no longer getting unemployment, they don't count you as part of the workforce anymore. And so all of those people, those millions of people who are still without jobs, aren't being counted as unemployed anymore because of the way we count unemployment in this country. And so, there's still millions of people out of work, but because they've dropped off of the unemployment rolls, now it looks, or they've been dropped off the unemployment rolls, now they look like they're back to work and our economy's thriving again. Well, no, that's not what actually happened.
They're just not being paid for.
They're not being counted.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as unemployed. And so maybe some of your viewers would like to know this, but if you go and register with the Jobs for Ohio and just register with the employment agencies, the state employment agencies, then you'll be counted again as unemployed.
That is good information.
Yeah, as long as you're registered. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. But once you're no longer registered, and usually it happens when people are dropped off of the unemployment rolls,
and
they're no longer getting a check.
Yeah.
That's when they get dropped. So if you go and register with the job sites and still register as being unemployed, you'll still be counted.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense, and at least it would give everybody an accurate data count.
Exactly.
Because data is definitely an important part of the picture, getting accurate data. Let me
Yes,
put
it
it that
is.
way.
Yes, it is. Yes. And so, yeah, the economy, and it's also important to make sure that we are paying people a livable wage. And right now, and so I'll go back to healthcare just really quickly, because if we find a way to support everybody who needs healthcare, it'll take the burden off of small businesses. I'm a small business owner, so I understand the challenges of trying to pay employees livable wages and make sure you take care of benefits. It's expensive, but that's one of the ways that we can do it. And we can also ensure that everybody's paying their fair share in taxes, and that would also increase our tax base. So who's not paying their fair share? Well, once you're making $137 a year, you're no longer paying into Social Security. 137,000, I'm sorry. You're no longer paying into Social Security. And so they don't have to share that cost, but they could go back and they could lose that job and then fall under 137,000, and they'd have to pay into Social Security again, and they could draw Social Security just like everyone else. So it's really an unfair system that benefits people with resources.
So they would get the same benefits in the end, even though they weren't necessarily paying into it the entire time, like others perhaps using the same system.
Exactly.
I didn't know that was part of the deal either. Thank you.
And then the other thing is there's what, 20 million undocumented workers in this country who cannot get access to citizenship. If we allow citizenship to people who are already living and working here and they've been here for years,
that'll increase the tax base.
Exactly.
I'm Californian originally, so I'm fully aware of what an undocumented population can unfortunately do. It would be much easier on both the country and the citizens
on all of us,
if they were actually
they'd be paying their fair share. They'd be paying into the Social Security system, which would save that system as well. And then the third class of people would be ending mass incarceration. Right now, there's over 550,000 people who are, and that's just low-level drug offenders who are sitting in prison, who aren't paying into the tax system. We don't even try to rehabilitate them if they have drug and alcohol problems. So we need to do that and get people back working, get them paying back into Social Security so that we can save our Social Security system. So those are some of the things that are a priority for me.
Okay, well, thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to go over those. And I know I've learned a few things, regardless of district. Some of that information is extremely important, particularly the information about making sure that citizens who are unemployed are actually being counted as unemployed.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that and being willing to come on and talk to our viewers. And hopefully we can make sure that everybody at least understands the importance in the end of voting.
Absolutely.
Like if we can suggest anything, regardless of how you do it, it is our civic duty. We need to make sure that everyone gets out and votes. And hopefully when they do make that decision, they've looked at everybody and they're not just voting for a letter. They've actually considered the candidates before them, and they make the choice based on the candidate that makes the most sense.
Absolutely. And I think that has been the biggest challenge for people. Because people have been so accustomed to doing the same thing, and people are frustrated. They're not happy with their conditions, but they don't really understand the underlying causes and what's causing the issues. And so you get a billionaire, or at least somebody you think's a billionaire, and you put them in office hoping they're going to change things, when in actuality what has really happened is even a bigger restructuring of the system to marginalize people who really had hope in his ability to change things. So it'd be nice to make sure. I think, what is it, the doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Expecting different results, exactly.
So you got to try and change up what you actually do to see if the results change that way.
Absolutely.
Sometimes go out on a limb, so see if something new will work, since the old way is not.
I think a lot of people thought that they were doing something new. They were bringing somebody in the system that wasn't part of the status quo. And in actuality, I think we've gotten an accelerated version of what subtly was happening under
the underlying undercurrent.
Exactly.
Honestly, it's been very refreshing to see that there have been quite a few, at least on the lower level and in the representation of the district level, has been a lot of politicians. It's people that aren't politically based. They're all like, I'm tired of this. I want to fix it. And they're coming out. So that sounds a bit like what you described.
It's exactly what has happened. And, you know, like I said, I didn't want to run at first, but I do believe that it is a civic duty and a responsibility for people who know and who understand what's actually happening in the system to do something about changing it. Yeah. And so it's a huge sacrifice, but one that I have taken on and I'm willing to take on in order to make sure that the people are served.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming in this evening, and thank you all so much for watching the program. We hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something about our neighboring District 8. And if you are from that district and watching the program, we hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Enoch speak as much as I did. Thank you all and have a wonderful night. We'll see you next time.